You're listening to What She Said with me, Candace Sampson, and this is your weekly reminder to take up big space in life, laugh loudly, absorb new knowledge, and continue to grow and expand. What She Said is your space for the big conversations that matter and the little joys that make life sweeter. This is where empowerment meets self-care and mansplaining has no seat at the table. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's jump into it because life's too short not to embrace the good stuff while we tackle the tough stuff.
Red pill content targets boys and men with a mix of self-improvement and misogyny, convincing them that feminism has made them victims and that regaining power means rejecting equality. And Tradwife, which is abbreviated for traditional wife content, it romanticizes an outdated, submissive role for women, selling it as empowerment while reinforcing the idea that a woman's worth is tied to serving a man and staying out of the workforce.
That's Abhi Ahluwalia, founder of Unlearn, an organization that helps educators and parents tackle some of the most pressing issues facing kids today, from bullying and belonging to the very real dangers of online radicalization. In this episode, we talk about the Netflix docuseries Adolescence, how algorithms are pulling kids into harmful ideologies like red pill and Tradwife content, and why critical conversations at home and in schools matter more than ever. So for a change of pace, let's hear what he said. Abhi, it's so great to have you here with me today. And I want to start with the docuseries Adolescence because it's really striking a chord globally. What did you think when you first watched it?
Candice, thank you for having me. It's a great question. It's, wow. So as a father of two children, who are very close in age to the main character, Jamie, it was jarring. It was eye-opening. It was scary. My eldest is 13 and my youngest son is about to turn 12 in about a week. And I started thinking about whether we need to better monitor not only the amount of screen time that they get, but what are they doing when they're online, opening up those conversations and just reflecting like it's that docuseries highlights a parent or caregiver's worst nightmare. A 13-year-old child being accused of murder. And, there were many moments when my partner and I, were looking at each other and my eyebrows are up and I'm like, wow, right? Do we need to think about this some more? Do we need to be more proactive with our own children?
I feel like that was a discussion probably in a lot of homes. Just what I'm seeing, the discourse online of people discussing it are completely unaware of what is happening online and what their kids are actually consuming. So what does it actually look like when a kid is being radicalized online? Can you walk us through a real life case or pattern you've seen?
Yeah, sure. It's often gradual, often starts with what seems to be harmless content. A child might be engaging with some self-improvement or some gaming content, but algorithms can lead them down a path towards more extreme views. And some common red flags that we might want to look out for is maybe some sudden personality changes, withdrawal from family, increased secrecy about online activity, or parroting some language from radical online communities. And then maybe as parents and caregivers starting to open up and ask some questions about what's going on there.
Is there any language you can think of off the top of your head that parents might say, oh, that's a red flag?
We have a post, so that, there's a lot of vitriol on social media, as you know. Our team is trying to use social media for good and just over the past day or two. So if you are on social media and you're interested in some resources, if you're on Instagram, for example, our handle is unlearn_com. And I just saw something this morning that our team put out. It's the post says, she said she was with her sneaky link. I thought it was just a nickname. They kept talking about Skittles. I had no idea they meant pills. It sounds harmless until you know what it really means. So this is a post for adults, educators, parents, caregivers. So words like Skittles, what adults think it means, candy. Talking about candy. What it actually means, it's misused prescription pills.
Right.
It's like, whoa, right? That's pretty coded. Sneaky link, we might think it's a file or a nickname. It's a secret meetup or relationship. We've heard the expression clapped. Most of us think, okay, well, it's some sort of form of applause. It's an insult about appearance. Tends to refer to someone being ugly. And there's a few others on there that allow people to check out if they want to learn more about some of these terms.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to put that in the link in the show caption when this goes live. The series, though Adolescence, is set in the UK, but the stats here in Canada are just as alarming. Cyberbullying, online radicalization, isolation that kids feel. What's going on in our schools and our communities that we're missing that is driving this in this community of kids?
Candice, let's take a look at some of those stats in Canada. So you talked about this docuseries is set in the UK. It's taken the world by storm. I think it's the number one show or docuseries in 70 countries the last time I checked. So what's going on here? What's resonating? So in Canada in particular, when we look at some stats, 47% of Canadian parents report their child has experienced bullying at school. That's a stat from 2023, and I wonder, has that gone up?
That's quite high.
That is really high. That's parents reporting that their child has experienced bullying. But 23%, that's 1 in 4 Canadian students report being cyberbullied in the past year. 1 in 4. So what's going on, as you asked, in our schools and communities that we're missing? Here's a couple things to think about. Lack of digital literacy education. So some schools focus on general online safety, but often don't address how algorithms shape worldviews. But also parents need to take responsibility for ensuring that their children understand online safety. And for those of you that are not familiar with algorithms, it's essentially when we're looking at online content, if we're on social media platforms, whatever we consume, it starts to feed us more of that content. And something else to consider as well is this failure to create belonging, spaces of belonging, where when young people don't feel seen, heard, or valued in their real-world communities, they seek validation in online spaces that might exploit their frustrations. So how do we create community schools where everyone can show up as their authentic self and feel a sense of belonging? And that's the work that Unlearn leads in schools and communities.
I think parents and adults really need to understand algorithms as well. I understand it's important for kids to understand it, but I don't think a lot of adults understand how algorithms work. And I'm going to use a very lighthearted example here, but it will drive the point home. I was scrolling on TikTok and I saw a very cute Highland cow. I wanted to know more about Highland cows. Now suddenly my entire feed is Highland cows and how people actually live with them and have them as pets. And it is feeding me this because I showed curiosity towards it. And so that is all I get. So all it takes is for a moment of curiosity for a kid to see something that sparks their interest, or they think, I want to know more about that. And suddenly it's in their feed constantly. And that just invites more of it. So it's creating an awareness, I think, of how the algorithm sort of links on or grabs onto that curiosity and gives you way more of it than you ever wanted.
Great example. You said the Highland cows. Great example. So I've been guilty. I don't spend a whole lot of time on social media. I set up an Unlearn Instagram account, so when we do Instagram lives, and I know you can. There's a lot of benefits to social media and accessing information. I'm into health and wellness, so I start to watch some videos and some content on that, and all of a sudden my feed is full of that. So, for example, I'm telling my wife, we can't cook with those black spatulas anymore.
Right.
We can't use that Teflon pan. We can't eat that. Those grapes, no, we can't eat those. And I've been going down this rabbit hole. My feed is full of things that we can't do with regards to health and wellness. And I'm like, Have we damaged the earth so badly that we can't eat and consume things? It's a great example about the cows, is that how we go down that rabbit hole, and that algorithm starts to feed us more of what we've just taken a look at. And that can be a slippery slope.
Well, listen, I never wanted a Highland cow before, but now suddenly I would like one in my house. So, these are the things that happen when you're online, but that's a lighthearted example. But there are very dangerous examples out there of how people are force-fed an ideology or something that they never really thought of before, and suddenly it becomes part of their personality. So let's talk about the content kids are consuming. We're seeing this disturbing rise in red pill content targeted at boys, and Tradwife. I don't think people think about this, but Tradwife content aimed at girls. What's drawing young people into these ideologies?
Let's not make the assumption that some people listening may not know that these terms mean. So maybe we start there and define them. And Candace, feel free to elaborate on this as well. So red pill content targets boys and men with a mix of self-improvement and misogyny, convincing them that feminism has made them victims and that regaining power means rejecting equality. And Tradwife, which is abbreviated for traditional wife, content, it romanticizes an outdated, submissive role for women, selling it as empowerment while reinforcing the idea that a woman's worth is tied to serving a man and staying out of the workforce. So what's drawing young people into these ideologies? I think coming back to that piece around a desire for belonging, adolescents crave identity, structure, community. These ideologies provide a sense of purpose and certainly and certainty in a confusing world. So something else to think about is this reaction to uncertainty. So in times of economic, social, and cultural change, which we're experiencing a lot of these days, traditional or rigid ideas about gender offer a comforting illusion of stability.
Yeah, I was talking with my 20-year-old about the Tradwife aesthetic just the other day. And she was saying, she's well aware we have a lot of these discussions in the house. So she's aware of what she's watching. But she said there is something so appealing about that aesthetic, about how clean the house is, how beautiful their clothes are, how great the kids are. And, I just reminded her I was a Tradwife, and I'm putting this in quotes, I stayed at home with my kids their entire life. I worked from home, but I stayed at home with my kids. I said, it's not hard to remember that it was never like that, right? We never had these, it was always chaos behind the scenes. You were always running somewhere. So it's always good to know that this is a very polished perception, or polished act that's being put on for these kids. And I think it's good for parents to look at these videos with their kids and break that down for them, to understand that oftentimes these Tradwives have a whole production crew there filming this.
Yeah, great point. Absolutely. I love the idea of not just pointing a finger, like, what are you watching? And then them shutting down and closing the device, but just maybe having conversations about, what are you looking at? Let's talk about this. Can we open up those and be a safe place for us to open up these important conversations?
Absolutely. So how do these messages around gender roles, power, and identity take root so easily, though, in young minds? Is it because we're not having these conversations about it?
I think that's part of it. I think young people are in a critical stage of identity development and are highly influenced by what they see online. Coming back to that algorithm piece around feeding them emotionally charged content. And without those strong media literacy or a trusted adult like yourself to help unpack it, these messages can feel like the truth. We live in a world where we're watching things in the news, on social media, and you're starting to wonder, is that real? And you accept it for what it is. And and with AI and things that are coming into the world now, it's so easy to put forward a particular message and people to just assume that that's accurate.
I don't know if you caught Mark Carney's speech yesterday, but he touched on something that I think is really big right now because I don't think a lot of people are understanding this. He was talking about how he received a letter from a 9 or 10-year-old kid who is worried about our economic future. And he was, you could sense the heartbreak in his voice that a kid was stressed about this. Now, a child isn't watching necessarily the news at home. I certainly never watched the news at home with my kids when I was 9 and 10 years old. But because our kids are watching the same content we are on TikTok, on Instagram, or wherever they are, they're getting the exact same content that adults are getting. They have this additional stress in their life that they have no life experience to filter and to work through. And so that just adds a whole new element to it. I think that even adults are not really grasping the full consequences of this.
Indeed. And I think that's why it's important for us to open up some of these conversations at home. In the schools, we talk about critical thinking is at the heart of what Unlearn does. How do we come in and open up some of these important conversations? Because when data shows that when a child doesn't feel safe, cared for, and included, they can't achieve to their highest academic potential. So can we create places, brave spaces in schools and workplaces for us to open up some of these important conversations? You're talking about a young child reaching out to our prime minister and voicing his concerns. I mean, that's a powerful example of what's weighing on their minds, right?
Right. Like, I don't think a 9 or 10-year-old should be stressing about these things. And so even if the parents are not creating that stress at home, and they're likely not because parents try to protect their kids from this, they can't avoid that stress when they go online because there are no guardrails. There are no walls to protect them from seeing this. And because they have no life experience through any of this, they are just carrying, and I'll bring it back to a personal example a little bit. When my daughter was quite young, we were sitting around the kitchen table one night and I said, to my partner at the time, I said, "Did you hear about that sinkhole?" And my daughter broke down crying, just an absolute wreck. And through conversation and getting it out from her, it came out that they had talked about sinkholes in class months before. And she had been walking around with this anxiety for months without sharing it with us, that a hole was going to open up beneath her and swallow her.
Wow.
And I think kids probably see stuff like this online all the time and just carry it around without being able to verbalize it until a moment comes that they break or they snap or that anxiety comes pouring out.
No doubt. Another great example. I mean, I think about COVID and we've come through it and many of us have kind of forgotten about it. And it's such we never grew up with something so extreme like that. And to imagine children having to navigate that, thinking,
Right.
I can't see grandma or grandpa. I can't touch them. I can't interact with someone. I'm told to wash my hands. Like there's so much. Think about the anxiety that they're still holding on to, that the world was in that state. Can we get back there? And are they comfortable? And do we create the conditions and opportunities? Do we create opportunities for us to connect with our children to start to talk about things that are on our minds?
And this is what you do through Unlearn. So what are you saying to parents who feel like they're already losing the battle, who maybe didn't grow up with this technology and are now trying to play catch up?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first off, I would say it's never too late. So even if your child has been exposed to some harmful ideologies, the most powerful antidote is a strong, trusted relationship with a caring adult. So we often, when we're doing workshops at schools, we're asking students, we're giving them scenarios to think about, again, and to engage them in critical thinking, not give them the answer as to how to deal with that situation. But if you're in this situation, what could you do? What have you done? What do you wish you would have done? Or what have you seen others do? So again, engaging them in that critical thinking piece and reminding them that there isn't always just one right answer. And, that finding a caring adult when something at school, for example, takes place, getting them involved. And if there's a caring adult at home, right? I strongly believe that that piece around having a trusted relationship with a caring adult is really important. Something else to think about for parents and caregivers, you don't have to be a tech expert. You might be thinking like, I have no idea what they're on and what they're doing. Again, focusing on guiding their critical thinking rather than micromanaging every app or video they consume. Another piece that I can personally work on is ask and don't accuse. If you're noticing troubling language or beliefs, start with curiosity. Not always easier said than done. Something along the lines of, Candace, I heard you say, can you tell me more about where that idea came from? So, I'll give you an example. My eldest, he's currently 13. Maybe it was about a year ago. He came home. He was just emptying out his bag from school. I was in a meeting and I was just wrapping up. And he was washing some dishes, putting some things away. And then he said something, an expression, a word that he used. And I was like, what did you say? And he kind of shut down because thought he said something wrong. And I said, no, there's a word that you used that I think I know what the meaning of that word is. Can you here's what I think you said. And he said, yeah. And I said, where did you hear that word from? And he goes, oh, there's some kids on my soccer team that are saying that word. And I shared with them what I knew or understood that word to be. And then we looked it up and I said, yeah, here's probably why we shouldn't be saying that. Right. So again, it's not accusing them, but just, helping, guiding them. Right. So oftentimes when we know better, we do better.
Yeah, I used to joke that I could get my girls to open up to me because I had what I called my resting mom face. I wouldn't let anything faze me. They could say the most extreme things and I would just try to keep it, neutral.
That's a great skill set.
The most shocking thing would keep me the most neutral usually because I wanted to know more. And I knew that if I gave that away with the look on my face, they wouldn't open up to me. So I tried to not react, because sometimes that's the worst thing you could do because then they will immediately shut down and they're not going to tell you anything. And of course, you want to come at this with curiosity to understand it so that you can keep the conversation going. Otherwise, you won't be able to get them to understand why you don't want to continue using that word or behaving that way.
Hi, I'm Michelle Davis, host of Maverick Makers. Every week, I'm meeting entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs who are making it happen. These bold thinkers are taking big risks, are trailblazing the way in their industries and lives, and are changing how things are done or made. You will learn about their journeys, their lessons learned, and their biggest Maverick moves to date. Listen to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or at maverickmakerspodcast.com.
What happens when we play outside? We become healthier, both mentally and physically. We become more creative and more focused. We connect with nature, each other, and ourselves. Let's Take This Outside, a new podcast hosted by me, Marianne Iveson, an aspiring outdoor athlete and nature lover. I speak to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about their connection to nature, how it affects their performance, and everyday life. Let's Take This Outside, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, and at letstakethisoutside.ca.
Beyond assemblies and awareness days, what should schools actually do to foster safer, more inclusive environments for kids?
I think digital literacy programs are important. So working on developing that further. I know how do we teach students how to analyze media, spot manipulative tactics, and recognize echo chambers? I know we've worked with educators who are embedding some of that into their media literacy programming and curriculum, and I think that's important. We need to do that some more. Coming back to fostering real belonging, if students feel valued in their school community, they're less likely to seek that validation in extremist online spaces. So again, when we say, or I walked into schools and there was a message in that school that says all are welcome here, and I was like, okay, that's great. I love that message. But have you asked educators? Have you asked parents and caregivers who walked into your building? Have you asked your students? Do you feel a sense of belonging? Do you feel welcome here? And if not, what's preventing that from happening? What are the things that we need to do to help ensure that every child, adult, caregiver, parent walks into that building and feels a sense of belonging?
I have feelings on this next question right now because this leads me into government. Do you think the government is doing enough? What policies or regulations could actually make a difference here?
Yeah, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. Would you like to start? Or would you like me to?
No, I would just say I don't think they're doing enough, and I don't think they're acting quickly enough. I think they are woefully behind the times, and it's going to be harder and harder to catch up if they don't get involved quickly.
I agree with you. I think regulation of these online spaces is lagging behind. Platforms profit from engagement, right? So even when that engagement comes from harmful or extremist content, so as a result, I think stronger oversight is needed. I think we need some government intervention here. And perhaps collaboration with tech companies, pressure on social media platforms to take responsibility of how their algorithms contribute to radicalization is, I think, essential.
So you've talked about visible allyship and consistency, not just showing up on awareness days, which I think many are guilty of, I should say. Can you share what it looks like in practice to show up daily?
How do we model inclusion every day? Allyship, as you pointed out, isn't just about wearing a button or posting on social media. It's about calling out harmful behavior, amplifying marginalized voices, and creating real change in everyday spaces. So that's not always easy. When we see a behavior, or we hear someone say something, it's often easier for us to not do anything. We've never really thought about it. We've never put ourselves in those situations. And sometimes when we're in those such situations, and let's say something is being said or done to someone we care about, it's a close friend, it's a family member, we can go 0 to 100 real quick. We can get our back up, right? And I was in a school just this week where we're giving them a scenario. Something's happening. Let's think about this. Again, there isn't one right response. I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on how you would navigate this? And, earlier in that workshop, a student at the very front in the middle, impressed that they came front row center, and they shared that this person next to me is my very first friend at this school. It's an elementary school. So they were when we said, I want you to turn and talk with someone, but, and they're like, yeah, I could see that they were connected. And I was like, this happens in schools all the time. When we say, turn and talk, and there's a grouping of 3 at a table, all of a sudden someone's excluded. There's these tight relations. I said, can we be aware of that? So when we were talking about something happening, some harm, they're experiencing some harmful language, what would you do in these situations? And this student put up their hand and said, well, if it's someone I didn't really know, I'd go get a caring adult involved. But if it's my friend, they took their name, and I knew that was their very first friend ever, and he said things would go down, right? So he was basically saying, and people laughed, that he was going to get, aggressive or it was, a fight or something was going to happen. And I said, well, let's think about that. Instead of shutting that down, and, the teacher came up to me afterwards and goes, I really like how you, rather than, the kids laughed, and instead of not ignoring that comment, you shed some light on it. I said, look, when I was in high school and someone said something to a friend of mine or did something, someone I cared about, it was close to me, I would be like, what did you say? Say that again. And it was often myself whose name was being called on the announcement. Abhi Ahluwalia, please report to the office. And I said, we have to be careful about, how do we respond and not react in these situations? And sometimes, it's getting a caring adult involved. Sometimes it's walking away. Sometimes it's taking a deep breath so we don't get ourselves into trouble. Coming back to your question, I think challenging biases in real time, it's easy to speak up in a structured setting, but real allyship happens when someone calls out a harmful joke or a stereotype in just casual conversations. Again, it's easier not to, right? It's like,
right.
Oh, I can't believe they just said that.
Yeah. And we're all guilty of that awkward laugh, right? Where because you don't want to ruffle feathers. It's much easier to do online than it is face to face. And I think that's something that we need to really be practicing. Do you have a real life example, maybe from a workshop or a school visit, where you've seen change happen in a very tangible way?
Yeah. Many examples. I'll share one. So one that's fresh in my mind from this week. So literally 2 days ago, working with a school east of Toronto, working with all the students, kindergarten to grade 8, over a period of 2 days. And I think it's probably the final workshop, and we're working with the grade 8 students. And there was a class of students with autism joining us, and they were sat kind of at the back. And during this workshop, we do this activity where we have students check in with one another. And it's essentially, we use one of our unlearn designs, and it's a group of 4 individuals sat in front of a chalkboard, if you will, and they have batteries inside their heads, and their battery levels are at different levels. So one is pretty drained, it's red, one's fully charged, and the others are 40%, maybe 60%. And we use this to develop their critical consciousness around how people are feeling and how they show up at school and why. So what I did is I invited them to find someone to look at. So let's say you and I were partnered up, Candace, and I would just, based on your body language and what I'm noticing, how you're interacting so far in that workshop, I'm going to guess what your battery level's at. A number between 0 and 100, and it could include a decimal place or go below 0 and above 100. And then I'm going to ask you, Candace, how are you actually feeling today in this moment on this day, right? And then we'll ask you, well, why are you feeling that way? And so as we're unpacking this, one of the instructions I gave, I said, I see that there's some tight friendships here, right? When I said, turn and talk to someone and you're already grabbing someone, I said, I want you to be very aware that everyone in this gym is included.
Right.
Okay, go. So I was naturally wanting to go walk towards that class, the students, who have autism, and they were in the back. And one of them had came up at the very beginning of the workshop because I was playing music, and he literally had his head in my computer. He was like really curious about the track. He loved the song I was playing. And then he went and sat back down, and I played another song. He came back and he's like, who's the artist? And when was this song released? And I thought it was great. And I got to know what his name was. So I wanted to go back there because I noticed no one was interacting with them. And I said, no, let me just hold off a moment. Let me see how this plays out. And so I eventually walked back there, and there was one student who I checked in with him. I said, what's your battery level at? He's the one that came and was kind of looking at the music. And he said 100%. I said, great. I said, why? He said, excited. And I could feel his energy. I'm like, you know what? That's wonderful. I could feel your excitement. I said, why are you excited? He said, I'm excited about school. I said, that's wonderful. I said, not everyone feels that way. I think it's great that you're excited about school. And I was like, is that today, or are you typically excited about school? He goes, oh, every day. I was like, that's wonderful. And then I brought everyone back, and I asked them, I said, hey, did anyone choose or have a partner that they guessed their battery level and they were way off? And some hands went up, and some hands that typically don't go up. And I said, would you mind sharing? And they said, well, this is what I guessed, and this is what they're actually at. And I asked them, well, why, would you mind sharing why your battery level is so low or why it's so high? And I said, I gave everyone some specific instructions, and do you remember what I asked? And they said, yeah, get a partner or two and ask them, check in about the battery. And I said, yeah, but there's something else I asked. And there was a hand that went up on the very far side. And they said, you asked us to make sure everyone's included. I said, did that happen? And they're all like, yeah. And I said, are you sure? And they're like, maybe not. I said, tell me more about that. And I said, well, there's some students in the back here that, I don't think many of us really acknowledge them. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about that. I said, I went over there and I noticed that there was one student who got up and started to engage that class and was checking in with these students. And let's say, his name was Kevin. And I asked Kevin, I said, tell me why you did that, Kevin. And Kevin, he wore his baseball cap backwards. He I don't know, he just maybe seemed like fairly confident. One of those students that was fairly confident. He said, I think about treating people like I'd like to be treated. And I said, that's amazing. And I said, you engage a number of these students. And I said, tell me what happened. And he shared how they were feeling. Their battery levels were pretty high. And an educator put up their hand in that space and said, you know what, I've never seen a student with so much empathy and compassion. And again, it's an opportunity to allow those in that space to critically think about, you know what, I know that you have some friends, but do you even realize that there's people each and every day that walk through your building, this school, that never get talked to, that don't have a friend, that aren't excited about school, right? And so what can you do about that, right? When that person said, this is my very first friend ever here at this school, can you be that for somebody else? How do we build their critical consciousness about that? So, I mean, they're just one example of something so heartwarming where an educator said, I've never seen that level of empathy and compassion from a student before.
Yeah, sometimes it's just drawing attention to it. And it's a lesson that once learned is not forgotten. So if we don't get ahead of what's happening right now, I mean, I don't want to catastrophize too much, but what does the future look like for our kids when they become young adults?
Yeah. A generation struggling with identity and belonging. You know, without intervention, many young people will continue searching for purpose in spaces that exploit their insecurities. I think the good news, it's not too late. By fostering these critical thinking, the digital literacy, and real world belonging, we can help kids navigate these challenges in healthier ways. So I do have hope. The fact that, you know, young people are finding their voice, shows like Adolescents are resonating with global audiences. It's jarring, it's shocking. It shows something like as a parent or caregiver's worst nightmare. But I think it's important to open up these critical conversations because sometimes we think my child, wouldn't get involved in that, or, I think we're okay. But, there was a moment in that docuseries where the father turned to his son and said, I'm going to ask you once, did you do it? And I was just picturing, myself in that moment. And I was like, and he responded, no, Dad. And he says, okay, I believe you. Right. And if you've been so radicalized in thinking that what you've done is not wrong, and I don't want to give away, what's going on in that docuseries, but there's so much to be unpacked there.
What's one uncomfortable truth you wish more people would say out loud about bullying, belonging, or the content our kids are exposed to?
Silence is complicity. Every time a harmful comment or belief goes unchallenged, it reinforces the idea that it's acceptable. So when we do work with educators, we do educator professional development, it's a challenging time to be an educator. Students are saying and doing things. They're influenced by with this whole conversation around what's online, etc. And some educators are afraid to say or do the wrong thing. And I think it's an important message, or an important message gets conveyed when we don't call it out or perhaps call it in. The behavior and the language and things that are being said or done, because now are we setting the tone to say that that's acceptable behavior in my classroom, in the hallways at this school? So we all need to be on that page. I think extremist movements are filling a gap we're not addressing. If we don't provide young people with healthy, meaningful ways to explore identity, power, and belonging, someone else will.
Your journey with Unlearn started as an apparel company over 25 years ago. So what pushed you to turn an apparel company into an education force that we're seeing today?
Candace, it really happened organically. So we were using, in the early 90s, we started using clothing as a way to provoke thought and inspire positive change. So literally the designs were meant to be thought-provoking. We didn't want to stand on our soapbox and tell people how to think, but we just wanted to engage them in critical thinking about things that are happening in the world around us. And what we heard were educators were bringing our clothing into their classroom. So they were either wearing it or they were holding them up, and they were challenging their students to think about these designs. And we had many requests over the years to say, hey, have you got something else that we can use? So which led to the development of Poster Pack 1. It was literally a decade worth of clothing designs curated into a poster pack collection. 24 designs in that poster pack. I have one right here on my desk.
So for those listening, you'll have to hop over to YouTube to see this.
Yes. So it's essentially the size of a record album, and there's 24 designs in each of them. These designs are open for interpretation. There's different ways of interpreting these messages. They come with discussion guides, etc. And so we were invited to do some professional development at a school board. It was Durham District School Board, good 13, 14 years ago. We used these designs as that critical thinking tool in that session. Someone in that session felt very strongly about that experience and said, these are really powerful. We'd like to bring them into every school in our system, but we want your support on how we can leverage them as critical thinking tools. And it really spread organically. So there's school boards across this province and now starting to spread across Canada and the United States. It's gone to Australia. Someone's taking them to Nepal as well. Again, how do we invite people to think about things that are happening in the world around us, to create brave spaces to open up some critical conversations?
What keeps you going when this work gets heavy?
Yeah, it can get heavy and be heavy. It's those beautiful unlearn moments. It's the student at the back of the class who we're in a workshop and I feel in my mind the bias that we all have. I've lost him. At the end of the workshop, he sticks around. He helps to clean up. He comes over, gives me a fist bump, and he says, thank you. It's the student who asks after an unlearn workshop, hey, are you accepting volunteers? How can I get involved? It's the educator who asks, how can I get involved? Or how can I work for unlearn? It's examples like someone sees or connects with the message on one of our clothing items and is literally moved to tears because they resonate with that message. An employee from an organization or an educating saying that was the most inspiring or impactful workshop that they've ever attended. There was, again, that example of this past week when literally 2 days ago, a grade 8 student with autism puts up his hand in a workshop with 50 other students in that gymnasium and says, that unlearned design that we're looking at says, that's me. This is how I feel when I'm sad and alone and when people say things to me. And educators shared with me after that in the office. It's like, do you hear his comment about that? I was moved to tears listening to that child connect to that image the way they did. It's those moments that keep me going.
If there's one thing you hope parents or educators, or even if there's a policymaker listening to this today, what would you like them to take away from this conversation?
This is serious. It's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. We need to act now. And if things are already happening within a school or with a child or, with your own child, just a kind reminder, it's not too late.
Abhi, where can people connect with you or perhaps have Unlearn come in for an education system to their school or organization?
So to learn more about Unlearn, you can visit unlearn.com. So www.unlearn.com. If you'd like to set up a meeting to learn about how we can help support your organization, your school, your company, if you send an email to info@unlearn.com. If you go to our main website, at the bottom, there's our social media platforms. Again, I mentioned there's a lot of vitriol on social media. Our creative team is trying to leverage social media for good. We've heard parents open up some of these posts and have dinner time conversations with their own children. Educators are unpacking them in their classrooms. So if you're looking for some support that way, we're on Instagram, unlearn_com, and some other social media platforms. You can check out our website.
All right. Incredible. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Candice. Wishing you a great day ahead.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share it with someone who'd love it too. And don't forget to hit subscribe to What She Said with me, Candice Sampson, on your favorite podcast app. It's the easiest way to stay connected. Want more? Sign up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com to get all the latest updates, and let's keep the conversation going on social. You can find What She Said on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll find me on Threads, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Candace Said. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.
I'm Andrea Askowitz.
And I'm Allison Langer. And we are the hosts of Writing Class Radio, a podcast, but we are so much more. We have writing classes. So if you are looking for live online classes where you can join a community, write to a prompt, get feedback, and get better, check out all our classes at writingclassradio.com.
And listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at writingclassradio.com.
Hi, I'm Michelle Davis, host of Maverick Makers. Every week, I'm meeting entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs who are making it happen. These bold thinkers are taking big risks, are trailblazing the way in their industries and lives, and are changing how things are done or made. You will learn about their journeys, their lessons learned, and their biggest Maverick moves to date. Listen to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or at maverickmakerspodcast.com.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.